Hello, economic warriors, and welcome back to Boss Economic World. The only show that puts on its rubber gloves and wades through the muck of Washington, D.C. to find out why your portfolio is acting weird and what it all means for your actual, real-life wallet. Today is November 10th, 2025. And for the past 40 days, the United States government has been running a social experiment with the tagline, "What happens if we just stop?" Well, after the longest government shutdown in American history, it looks like someone in the Senate finally found the emergency brake. Yes, late last night, after 40 long days and 40 sleepless nights for hundreds of thousands of federal workers, the political fever in Washington seems to have broken. A procedural vote passed 60-40, paving the way to reopen the government. The markets, of course, reacted like a parched man finding an oasis. S&P futures popped 0.7%, the tech-heavy Nasdaq jumped 1.1%. The message from Wall Street was clear: thank God, the adults are almost back in the room. But hold on. Don't go celebrating just yet. This isn't a peace treaty, it's a ceasefire. It's the political equivalent of two boxers, bloody and exhausted, agreeing to go back to their corners for a few rounds before coming out swinging again in January. So, the big questions are, what really happened? Who blinked first in this high-stakes game of chicken? And what has this 40-day masterclass in political dysfunction actually cost us? Let's break it down. First, let's look at the deal itself. It's not a grand bargain. It's not a budget. It's what's known in DC as a continuing resolution, or CR. For those of you not fluent in bureaucratic jargon, a CR is basically a note scribbled on a napkin that says, okay, we agree to keep paying the bills at the current rate for a little while longer so we can all go home for the holidays. In this case, the deal funds a few politically untouchable departments: Agriculture, Veterans Affairs, and Congress itself, for a full year. Smart move. Nobody wants to be the politician who defunds veterans' benefits or farm subsidies. But for everyone else? All the other massive agencies, transportation, Homeland Security, Commerce, you name it, they're only getting funding through January 30th. This means we're setting ourselves up for another potential shutdown crisis in just over 2 months. Just in time to ruin the new year. The bill promises to give back pay to the furloughed federal workers, which is the least they can do after turning their lives upside down. But make no mistake, this is a temporary fix. It's like putting a tiny band-aid on a gaping wound that needs major surgery. The fundamental disagreement that caused this whole mess hasn't been solved. It's just been postponed. So, why now? Why after 40 days of gridlock did a handful of moderate Democrats finally break ranks and vote with the Republicans to end this? This is the juicy part. This is where the politics meets the psychology. For weeks, the Democratic leadership, led by Chuck Schumer in the Senate and Hakeem Jeffries in the House, held a hardline. They blocked 14 attempts to pass a simple stopgap funding bill. Their demand? A long-term funding deal that included an extension of the expiring Affordable Care Act subsidies. Republicans, smelling blood in the water with a President Trump eager for a fight, said no way. They countered with demands of their own, and the stalemate began. So what changed? 3 things: people, polls, and panic. First, the people. Let's take Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. His state is ground zero for federal workers. For 40 days, his office has been bombarded with calls from constituents, highly skilled government employees, contractors, small business owners who suddenly had no income. They were missing mortgage payments, dipping into retirement savings, and wondering how they were going to buy groceries. The human cost became politically unbearable. When your voters are hurting that badly, your high-minded policy demands in DC start to sound a little hollow. Second, the polls. The prompt mentions the off-year elections just a few days ago. Democrats got swept in key local and state races. What does that tell you? It tells you the public's patience was wearing thin. The narrative the Democrats wanted Republicans are shutting down the government to deny you healthcare wasn't cutting through. The message the public was hearing was simpler: Washington is broken, and both sides are to blame. When you're the party out of power in the White House and Congress, both sides are to blame is a losing message for you. Republican strategists likely saw this and figured, correctly, that the Democrats' resolve was cracking. Third, and perhaps most importantly, was the panic. The Republican leadership and the White House played absolute hardball. They didn't just furlough workers, they started a mass firing campaign to escalate the pressure. They threatened to withhold paychecks even after a deal was reached. And then, the masterstroke of holiday chaos, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy ordered airlines to start canceling flights, blaming a lack of TSA agents and air traffic controllers. With Thanksgiving, the busiest travel season of the year, just around the corner, this was the political equivalent of a nuclear option. It turned a DC problem into a national nightmare. Suddenly, Democrats weren't just fighting for Obamacare subsidies. They were being blamed for ruining Thanksgiving for millions of Americans. That's a PR battle you cannot win. The combination of constituent pain, bad polling, and holiday travel panic was a triple whammy that forced the moderates to fold. They got a vague promise from Republicans to vote on the ACA subsidies later, which, in Washington speak, is worth about as much as a used lottery ticket. It's a classic case study. The party that tries to use a shutdown as leverage almost always ends up losing, because the public hates the disruption more than they care about the policy fight. Trump learned it in 2019 over his border wall, Republicans learned it in 2013 trying to repeal Obamacare, and now Democrats have learned it in 2025. But let's move on from the political palace intrigue to the part that really matters to all of us. The economic carnage. What did this 40-day temper tantrum actually cost the U.S. economy? The numbers are staggering, and frankly, infuriating. The Congressional Budget Office, the official nonpartisan scorekeeper, estimates that this shutdown has been costing the U.S. economy about $15 billion per week. Let me put that in perspective for you. The entire annual GDP of a country like Iceland is about $25 billion. We were effectively burning the economic equivalent of a small, developed nation to the ground every 10 days, all for a political spitting contest. By mid-November, the CBO projects that this fiasco will have shaved 1.5 percentage points off the annualized quarterly GDP growth rate. In an economy that's already walking a tightrope, trying to balance stubbornly high inflation with rising unemployment, that is a self-inflicted wound of catastrophic proportions. We're not just slowing down the car, we're actively slashing our own tires. And you can see the damage in the consumer sentiment numbers. The University of Michigan's survey just hit a 3-year low on Friday. People are scared. They see a dysfunctional government, they see prices staying high, they worry about their jobs, and they stop spending money. And when people stop spending money, the economy grinds to a halt. It's a vicious cycle, and our leaders in Washington just spent 40 days pouring gasoline on it. But here's the most dangerous part of all this, the part that affects every investment you have, every loan you might want to get, and the overall stability of the financial system. The Federal Reserve is flying blind. Think about it. The Fed's entire job is to navigate the U.S. economy between the rocks of inflation and the whirlpool of recession. To do that, they need data. They need the monthly consumer price index to see where inflation is going. They need the monthly jobs report to see if the labor market is overheating or collapsing. Where does that data come from? Government agencies like the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what have those agencies been doing for the last 40 days? Nothing. They've been shut down. So Jerome Powell and the rest of the Fed governors are sitting in the cockpit of a 747, in the middle of a hurricane, and the government has just painted the cockpit windows black. They have no idea how fast we're going, what our altitude is, or if there's a mountain right in front of us. They're making multi-trillion-dollar decisions based on last month's data and guesswork. It is, without a doubt, the single most reckless aspect of this entire shutdown. Any decision they make it to raise rates, to cut rates, to hold steady, is a gamble, because they're missing the most critical information. And this uncertainty has ripple effects. Look at the markets. While stocks are bouncing today on the hope of a deal, look at what happened during the shutdown. The 10-year Treasury yield, a benchmark for everything from mortgage rates to corporate debt, had become incredibly volatile. The Japanese yen, a traditional safe haven currency that investors flock to in times of crisis, saw a spike in demand. This is the market flashing a giant neon sign that says, "We do not trust the stability of the world's largest economy right now." And that is a terrifying signal to send. And it's not just the big picture stuff. The shutdown had weird, specific, and damaging consequences. We saw a bizarre legislative rider tucked into this bill that shows you how sausage is really made. The big beer industry, in the middle of a national crisis, managed to get a provision inserted that restricts the sale of intoxicating hemp products. The hemp industry is screaming bloody murder, claiming it threatens 325,000 jobs. So, while the government was closed, lobbyists were still hard at work, fighting a turf war between beer and weed that got wrapped up in the bill to pay our soldiers. You truly cannot make this up. So, where do we go from here? The Senate will vote, the House will likely follow suit. Speaker Mike Johnson has to wrangle his conservative flank who want a full-year bill with deep cuts, but they probably don't have the stomach for a longer fight. The president will sign it. The government will creep back to life. But remember that January 30th deadline. The core fight, the extension of Obamacare subsidies, is unresolved. Democrats want to extend them, arguing that millions will see their health insurance premiums skyrocket otherwise. Republicans are divided. Some want to let them expire. Some want to attach conservative changes, like income caps or work requirements. And some hardliners still want to repeal the whole thing and replace it with a magical, mythical GOP plan that we've been hearing about for 15 years but has yet to materialize. This means we're all going to be back here in late January, watching the same soap opera, with the same characters, reading from the same script. The only difference is that the economy will be weaker, the public will be more cynical, and the stakes will be just as high. So, the boss's final take? There are no winners here. The Republicans forced the Democrats' hand, but they did it by taking a sledgehammer to the economy and further eroding public trust. The Democrats secured a promise that's likely not worth the paper it isn't written on, all while being painted as the party that was willing to ruin Thanksgiving over a policy dispute. The biggest loser, as always, is the American public and the U.S. economy. We've lost tens of billions in economic growth. We've introduced massive uncertainty into the financial system. And we've proven to the rest of the world that our political system is dangerously, fundamentally fragile. The market's little relief rally today is nice, but don't be fooled. The structural problems haven't been fixed. The clowns are still in charge of the circus. My advice? Enjoy the holidays, but keep your portfolio diversified and your expectations low. Because Season 2 of Government Shutdown 2026 is already being written. That's all the time we have for today. Stay sharp, stay informed, and never, ever trust a politician's promise. I'll see you on the next one.